and welcome to The Context USA. I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington.
And I'm Ben Brown here in London. And ahead tonight, NATO's chief is back in Brussels for more meetings with President Trump in Washington tonight.
His leadership here is crucial. He is clearly providing it. And he has to dialogue with all the leaders. He has to dialogue with Putin. He has to dialogue with Zelensky, exactly as he did in Gaza, putting pressure on all relevant parties to get the deal done.
The house behind me was hit by a drone, killing a mother, a 12-year-old girl and a 6-month-old baby. I don't believe a word Putin says, nor do I think Trump is in any hurry to help.
The panel to join us tonight is Jennifer Carroll, former Lieutenant Governor of Florida, and Joy Cheney, Democratic strategist and former Chief of Staff to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
Welcome to the program. We're only months into President Trump's second term, but it is clear how he sees the vision of his legacy. At home, it's tough action and radical changes, visible but highly controversial crackdowns on crime and immigration enforcement, and the pursuit of efficiency by way of big cuts to the federal workforce.
And abroad, Mr. Trump, it seems, wants to be seen as a strong leader of the world's most powerful country, but also as a kind of president of peace and ender of conflicts. He's already claimed what he is convinced is a historic success in the Middle East, and that ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, while pretty shaky, does generally appear to be holding for the moment.
But at the top of this hour, we're focusing on Ukraine. As the war rages on there, we're keeping an eye on Washington today. First, some developments just in. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent flagging an imminent pickup in sanctions on Russia.
We are going to either announce after the close this afternoon or first thing first thing tomorrow morning, a substantial pickup in Russia's sanctions.
That message from the Treasury Secretary as NATO's chief, Mark Rutte, is back in town in Washington for meetings with President Trump. Plenty of questions still to be answered on how to find progress towards an end to the fighting. For now, that progress appears badly stalled.
Well, when President Zelensky went back to the White House last week, there was no repeat of their famous or infamous Oval Office spat, on camera at least, but there were reports of something of a shouting match between him and Donald Trump behind the scenes.
Meanwhile, talk of a second summit between the Russian and U.S. leaders was quashed by the White House on Tuesday, now saying there are no plans for such a meeting in the immediate future. Mark Rutte has been quick to point out today's visit was pre-planned, not to clean up any diplomatic mess, but to offer whatever support NATO could to bringing an end to the conflict.
No, not at all, because this was already planned before. I was texting with the president after an enormous success in Gaza, and we said, hey, let's have a meeting in Washington to discuss how we now can deliver his vision on peace in Ukraine. And when it comes to the meeting last week, Friday, you have also heard President Zelensky. I think that was a good meeting. It was a successful meeting. It's exactly what we need. It's the American president who broke the deadlock with Putin in February, took that leadership role, which only he can, and he is delivering. And I'm really commending him for that. So that was a good meeting, and we will build on that.
Well, let's join our North America correspondent, Noumir Iqbal, who's following developments from the White House for us. It's quite an important meeting, isn't it? Ukraine top of the agenda. Of course, Mark Rutte is an interesting character, isn't he? He gets on very well with Donald Trump, called him daddy at one stage, famously.
He did, although he tried to play down what he meant on that. Yeah, look, they both have a very close relationship, which is full of Mr. Rutte being very flattering and deferential towards Donald Trump. I mean, at that press gathering there you saw at the Senate, he basically said that Donald Trump is the only one who can solve what's happening in Ukraine and praised him for his success in Gaza. But, you know, as you mentioned there, I mean, it's still fragile what's happening there. But you can't blame Mr. Rutte in some ways for having this approach to Donald Trump. We know that Mr. Trump has been incredibly tough on NATO, accusing NATO, European countries of not pulling their weight when it comes to spending. Spending has now increased, and Mr. Rutte said that is down to Donald Trump. So in many ways, he's had to have this close relationship with him in order to keep NATO relevant.
And from Donald Trump's point of view, he has, everyone acknowledges he's been successful in the Middle East in getting that ceasefire. He is finding it much, much harder to get any sort of end to the fighting in Ukraine, even though, of course, originally he said he could do it within a day of taking office. Yes, and he'd also said that the same with Gaza, which took a lot longer. I think the real challenge here, obviously, is how to deal with Vladimir Putin, who is very different to Benjamin Netanyahu in the sense that I think that Donald Trump says that him and Putin have a very close relationship, and that is why he can get the president of Russia to make concessions. But it has been really hard. We saw more than 2 months ago that meeting in Alaska, which didn't pull off any concrete results. And then they had this long phone conversation last week. And what tends to happen after these conversations, Mr. Trump is very optimistic. His critics would say he gets played by Putin. And he has, to be fair to him, has said in the past that he does wonder whether he's being, to use that term that he has used himself, played by Mr. Putin. And then he said, well, we'll meet at some point in Budapest. And then we heard that meeting is now off. And so I think that will be probably music to the ears of Mark Rutte and certainly many of the European leaders who are worried about exactly what concessions Ukraine would have to make compared to what Putin would have to make. I mean, we know that Vladimir Putin is pretty much not giving up on his objectives. And interestingly, you played a clip there by Scott Bessent, who said that there are these sanctions that he said, just to quote, there's a substantial pickup in Russia sanctions. This is the criticism that Donald Trump has faced, that, talking a tough game on Russia, but are you actually going to sanction them? And we don't know exactly what that will involve. We know that there's this Senate bill that's led by the Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, to levy steep sanctions on Russia. It's had dozens of sponsors and lawmakers, and they have said they are waiting for a go-ahead from the White House to bring the bill up for a vote. All right, Nomia, thank you very much indeed. That's Nomia Iqbal, our North America correspondent, with the latest from Washington. Thank you.
And we can bring in our panel on this discussion. Jennifer Carroll and Joy Cheney are with us. And I do want to update our viewers. We mentioned that Secretary Bessent has been speaking about these sanctions that Ben had mentioned with Nomia there that will be applied on Russia. We don't know the extent of those sanctions yet, but he also says that Donald Trump is, quote, disappointed on where we are in talks to end the Ukraine war. So that's the message from the Treasury Secretary ahead of these sanctions that we are told to be expecting. So let's start with our panel then. Joy, with you here. I mean, we have seen a back and forth from President Trump here, haven't we, in the messaging towards Vladimir Putin, towards Volodymyr Zelensky. Yes, there will be sanctions. No, there won't be. Yes, there will be. What do you think this has achieved?
Well, I'm going to give a rare compliment to Donald Trump and just the role that America plays. I mean, we are somewhat in the middle here. We're trying to effectuate a peace plan. We clearly, if you are at odds with both sides, that's probably a good sign. It means that, you're putting pressure on everyone. I think it was probably correct for Donald Trump to pull back on a meeting with Putin. The last meeting seemed to benefit Putin more than it benefited President Trump. He put himself out there. Putin, didn't really respect that. And so even though he's eager to be on Russian soil and to move this peace process forward, he wasn't afraid to say no. So I'm going to give him credit for that. I think it would have been a mistake to force a meeting for a meeting's sake, right? I may question the motives here, but he clearly wants to meet. But he was willing to sacrifice it, or at least his staff convinced him so, because you got to make sure that if the American president is traveling, we're actually getting something from it.
Jennifer?
Well, I totally agree. And the other thing, too, that President Trump is probably getting very frustrated with Putin because he steps forward and then he takes 3 steps back, Putin does. So right now, Putin is not showing that he's trustworthy to his word. And that's one thing that Donald Trump takes to heart. If someone gives their word, that they'll stay steadfast to that. I believe it's long overdue for these sanctions to occur, but it cannot occur in a bubble just for the United States to have those sanctions on Russia. The United States needs to get the European allies and others to step up to the plate, because if the U.S. puts sanctions on Russia and Russia is able to do a backdoor dealing with India and China and any other country, then the sanctions that the U.S. is putting on is for naught, because Russia will still continue doing what they're doing. So the sanctions has to be fierce and far-reaching so that the impact is truly felt, to bring Putin to the table to sign the document that he and Zelensky would agree to stop this senseless killing.
And Joy, I think everyone, both in America, well, not everyone, but a lot of people in America and around the world are kind of confused by President Trump's policy on the Ukraine war, because he sort of blows hot and cold with both Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky, doesn't he? And it's hard to know from one day to the next exactly what he thinks of them, what he wants to do. It's clear he wants a peace deal, but how to get there is not that certain.
Well, I'm a Democrat, so I'll say a broken clock is right twice a day. I think in this case, his improvisational style probably is working in his benefit. And the fact that he seems more interested in peace than he does with, one side or another. He may be a little more slanted to Russia, but, that's the politics in me talking. But what I would say is that it's probably a good sign that he is putting pressure on both Zelensky and Putin, that he is holding them both accountable, that he's not offering them platitudes that, he can't make a reality. That's probably the case. Ultimately, though, you're going to have to get the two of them together. I know that's what he's pushing for. That's where this needs to go. So it's important for America and for the president and for other countries to be involved. But ultimately, these two leaders are going to have to come together and put together a deal. And at some point, Donald Trump's not going to be able to snap his fingers and make that happen. And just on the sanctions, Trump himself has said it's unlikely that these sanctions are going to make a huge difference, not just this, but over time, right? These sanctions, so unless we're going to deal with a really steep sanction like being offered by, Senator Graham, I'm just not sure it's going to work. Putin seems to be motivated by something different. And I think that's, total control of Ukraine.
And Jennifer, just quickly, what Mr. Zelensky really wants from Donald Trump is more long-range missiles, Tomahawks, which he so far hasn't been given. Do you think that could come down the road?
Well, I think that's where Donald Trump is posturing right now. He put the word out there that I have a lot of Tomahawks that I can give. But the bottom line is he probably wants to hold back and not go all out on Russia at this time. He will try to have a peaceful remedy because he wants to be the peace president, not the expansion of war president.
Okay, Jennifer and Joy, we'll be back with you both in a moment to talk about the bigger picture here of Donald Trump's foreign policy efforts. First, a break around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. We're here in Washington to find out what comes next.
Neither Vladimir Putin nor Donald Trump was able to say that they had agreed a ceasefire in Ukraine.
You can see this house has been completely washed away.
Not only at home, but around the world.
So easy to see all of the dead coral.
You can see the frustration and the desperation. There's simply no food.
Our correspondents give you the full story.
The residential area where the crash occurred is massive.
For a global perspective, join us on BBC World News America.
This is frontier country.
Broaden your horizons.
If this is what being a 21st century nomad is all about, sign me up.
The Caribbean's relationship with the seas are changing.
And deepen your understanding.
What must it have been like for them, not knowing whether they were going to make it?
How important is this region?
If something starts changing here, we see the change all over the world.
This is just incredible.
The Travel Show on BBC News.
Hello again. Now, before the break, we were focusing on the war in Ukraine, and it's a war that on the campaign trail, President Trump promised to end famously in just a day. Well, it's actually been 275 days since his inauguration on January the 20th.
Over the course of 9 months, President Trump has both praised and expressed frustration with Presidents Putin and Zelensky while blaming the conflict on his predecessor. In a moment, we're going to take a step back and look at how this fits into the broader picture of the president's foreign policy. But first, let's have a listen to some key moments from Trump's involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war.
Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep.
I think I can say with great confidence he wants to see it ended also. That's good. You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. The leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating. Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going.
You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're going to just take a pass.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time.
Within 2 weeks, we're going to find out very soon whether or not he's tapping us along or not. You have two kids, they fight. Sometimes you let them fight for a little while. They gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him last night.
I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin.
Billions of dollars worth of military equipment is going to be purchased. A new deadline of about 10 or 12 days. Well, we're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today.
I believe we had a very productive meeting. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. I don't think you need a ceasefire. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and maybe they don't want that.
We also need to discuss the possible exchanges of territory, security guarantees for Ukraine, and this is one of the key points that we need to consider. And if this war's not going to get settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks.
Very good phone call. I thought very productive. But I'll be meeting with President Putin. So we're going to be talking about Tomahawks, and would much rather have them not need Tomahawks.
In my opinion, they should stop the war immediately. You go by the battle line wherever it is, otherwise it's too complicated. You'll never be able to figure it out.
Okay, we're going to look at that bigger picture with our panel in a moment. First, I'm joined in the studio by our senior North America correspondent, Anthony Zurcher. Anthony, very good to see you. And you've been writing on our website about how the considerations that went into and the circumstances that went into President Trump's success so far with the Gaza ceasefire are very different than the war in Ukraine. Just tell us a bit about that.
Right. It was an aligning of stars, essentially, in Gaza. And it goes back to how Donald Trump looks at negotiations. It's all about leverage and relationships. And that was one thing Donald Trump had in the Middle East. He had relationships with key Arab partners. He had relationships going back to his first term with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also with the Israeli people, which I think is an underestimated strength he had, the ability to pressure Netanyahu to take a deal because he was more popular in Israel than Netanyahu was, as you saw from people cheering his name but booing Netanyahu in those rallies after the peace deal was struck. So he was able to take all of these circumstances, including Israel bombing Qatar in an attempt to hit Hamas negotiators, pressure Israel to take a deal, and use the faith from both sides, the trust he had built up, to push it over the finish line. That is not something he really has in Ukraine. He doesn't really have any kind of trust with Zelensky. We saw some of the relationships, some of the sometimes stormy relationship just then with Zelensky. He thought he had trust with Putin. He thought he had a relationship with Putin that would translate into an ability to make a deal, and that has not proven to be the case. And in this case, both Ukraine and Russia still have something to fight for, and Trump doesn't have that leverage that he had in the Middle East to push them and make someone concede, give some ground to reach a deal. Ukraine doesn't want to do it because that would be ceding land. Russia doesn't want to do it because they still think they can win this war.
As this war in Ukraine continues on, we are seeing the Treasury Secretary Bessent say that sanctions are imminent, but still, we've seen many of President Trump's critics say that he's being played by Russia's Vladimir Putin. What does he say about that? What does the White House say about that?
Well, he was asked about that directly earlier this week. Are you being played by Vladimir Putin? And Trump said, I've been played by the best of them, but I've ended up okay. You know, it'll all be okay. He thinks that he still can have the upper hand with Putin. And I think there's still a belief that if he sits down with Putin and has face-to-face negotiations, they can reach a deal, which is why when we heard talk about long-range missiles last week and new sanctions last week. Putin got on the phone with Trump. They had a conversation. They said they were going to have a summit in Budapest, and those sanctions were put on hold. All of that has fallen apart now, and now you're hearing once again Bessent talking about new sanctions. There's talks about new use of long-range weapons, authorization for Ukraine to do this. We'll see if they follow through with it, see if this is once again another attempt to get Russia to the negotiating table. But it is interesting to see that the administration now is swinging back the other way and trying to get that leverage on Putin and Russia to get some sort of progress towards a deal.
What do these conflicts tell us about Donald Trump's foreign policy style, perhaps the Trump doctrine?
Well, the Trump doctrine is find a way to get a deal, right? I mean, if you read The Art of the Deal, one of the things he talks about there is leverage, finding out what motivates your opposition when you're doing a negotiation and finding a way to what they really want or to put pressure on them, and sometimes being creative about that, which is one of the reasons why in that clip we saw, Trump is reaching out and trying to find different methods, different tools, different ways of getting leverage over both parties. And at least so far, he's been unsuccessful. He had a breakthrough in Israel and with the Mideast peace negotiations, with the ceasefire in Gaza and hostage release, but he hasn't found that yet. But I think when it comes down to it, Trump wants a deal, almost wants some kind of a deal even more than he wants a specific resolution or a specific policy.
Okay, Anthony Zurcher, always great to get your analysis. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And let's go back to our panel to talk about this now. Jennifer Carroll and Joy Cheney. Joy, let's start with you because we want to broaden this out as Anthony was doing there, really. You know, compare and contrast Trump's efforts to get peace in Gaza compared to his efforts to get peace in Ukraine. He's been relatively successful in Gaza, clearly. What is the difference there? Is it his leverage on Netanyahu as opposed to his failure to leverage either Zelensky or Putin?
Well, you know, I'm going to take an unpopular opinion. I don't think it's about Donald Trump at all. I think it was about the people on the ground and the people on social media pushing Israel to the table, and then Donald Trump being a part of it. But there was a constellation of people, including Jews in America, who were saying we were disappointed with Israel. We were angry with Israel. We are angry with our leader. We don't want to see children dying in Gaza. There was the pressure of that kind of social media images put out there. The whole world cried out on behalf of first Israel and then the Palestinian people. That was tremendously important, giving not just Donald Trump, but many leaders, including yours in the UK, the leverage it needed to bring people to the table. Also, there's a money element here, which I don't think has been spoken about enough. Right? An element of Arab leaders wanting to do business, having already had relationships with the Trump family and wanting to do business there. And we'll find out about that soon, I'm sure, right? But I think those were things that are present in that crisis, which, by the way, we keep acting like it's some kind of done deal. It is not. It is still an incredibly precarious peace plan. And I'm not saying you all here, but I think that is important to remember.
Yeah, but also
here in Ukraine, we don't have that same leverage point, as your guest said before.
Yeah. All right. Let's put the same question really to Jennifer. I mean, obviously, everybody wants to see peace in both the Middle East and in Ukraine. And Donald Trump very clearly wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But why do you think he's been relatively successful in the Middle East, but really got pretty much nowhere in Ukraine?
I believe Ukraine is the nuance is a little bit different, as the other panelists mentioned, is in the support. Donald Trump thus far has had mainly verbal support from the European leaders and the other countries that do business with Russia. And it's just been a verbal. It hasn't been a to the table. This is what we will do in helping the United States to help move the needle between Russia and Ukraine. Also, too, you have egos involved. So you have two leaders that don't like each other, and at least Ukraine, Zelensky, is willing to come to the table and say, okay, I'm willing to concede some land with you, but not all. Let's have a conversation and move it forward. We need that same level of grassroots support, plus the other countries to come to the table and be forceful with Russia to say, we're not going to do business with you anymore, or we're going to withhold sanctions from you because this is not the right thing to do. Once Russia knows that it can do a backdoor with other countries and continue the same modus operandi, they're going to continue to do so. Also, too, the messaging and the marketing of why it's important to end the war between Ukraine and Russia leads itself to the countries themselves. For example, right in London and in the European area as well, you have Russia is accused of utilizing human smuggling to upset and create a destabilizing mechanism in the country. And if Russia is so methodical in their thinking to upset the security of the European nation in smuggling and in embedding illegal immigrants to upset the apple cart and destabilize the European nations, then this is something concerning, and it should be projected out to the community why it's important to back this issue and the other nations as well that's around to back this issue.
Jennifer, I want to come back to the point you made about Russia's business partners, if you will, India and China buying its oil and gas. There is a bipartisan bill in the Senate that would sanction any countries doing business with Russia. The White House hasn't seemed very happy to let that go forward. Why?
That's very interesting. And it all depends on a detail. What's written in there and how long is it and what are those particulars that's in the bill? I haven't read the bill, so I don't know. And that will be my take on it is how the bill is crafted in its current state. What if the White House is not agreeing to the bill itself that's being proposed, and they need to offer some language that will make it more palatable for them?
So can I just add that, we've talked about this before and why other countries are willing to go against the United States. I mean, in part, Donald Trump has in many cases made us a little smaller, right? Some of his antics, although he says we're the center of the universe, and I think sometimes countries make it appear as if we are the center of the universe, we're no longer the center of the universe, and people aren't necessarily clamoring to be in the good graces always of the United States anymore because we're disfavored in some places. And frankly, our leverage can be competed with China and other countries, and they have their own needs. We're taking care of ourselves. They're taking care of themselves. And so I think that is relevant to say. And to me, I just want to say one other thing. Donald Trump is about getting a deal.
Can I ask you to hold the thought, Joy, because we're just up against a break, but we promise we'll come back to you. Thank you so much, and stay with us.
Hello. The weather is looking quite disturbed over the next couple of days across western and central parts of Europe, thanks to this developing area of low pressure, this low deepening as it moves eastwards. This low has been named by the French Weather Service, named Storm Benjamin. It's going to bring some very strong winds right across France, but also through Belgium, the Netherlands. Could see wind gusts along this north coast of France for around 130 kilometres per hour. It's around 80 miles per hour. Across the western side of Turkey, we will see some showers, largely dry across Greece. But this rain band ahead of Storm Benjamin is going to move its way into the Alps, and the rain across the Alps and also northern Italy will turn very heavy indeed. There's some colder air also being drawn southwards with the strong winds around this storm system, so just 11 degrees in London. Now, our area of low pressure becomes very slow moving in the North Sea, so it stays very, very windy indeed for some of these coastal areas as we head through the day on Friday. Wet weather sliding its way eastwards across the continent. A little bit drier behind, but temperatures dropping away. Just 9 degrees there in Bern. We take a look at some of our city forecasts. It looks unsettled there in Paris. Stays rather cool in London, 11, 12 degrees. Also cooling off significantly there in Madrid. Further east, we will see some rain in Berlin. Temperatures by Sunday only getting to 9 degrees Celsius.
I'm heading to what some people consider the home of the world's finest coffee. The parish of Portland is in the northeast, and right in the heart of the mountain range is Devon's Coffee Farm. Unfortunately, coffee doesn't agree with me, so I'm meeting up with someone whose opinion I trust 100%. My big sister, Judith. She recently moved from the UK with her husband Carlton to this stunning part of rural Jamaica. Is that my big sis?
Little bro! Nice to see you.
How are you?
Oh, still on tiptoes.
You look well.
Yes, so
You're
do
looking
you.
good. You're looking good, and you've got the coffee
I
brewed
have
already.
the coffee.
Every composer knows when another composer is being influenced by their music.
The models wear costumes for men and women, inspired by outfits spanning the 8 decades of Empress Wu's long life.
If you can play this more Italian, think of opera, Bellini opera. Think of like Maria Callas. More free.
As a writer, I care so much about the human imagination, about creativity, about our ability to tell stories. Just imagine our lives without storytelling.
Inspiring arts and culture on BBC News.
This is not your typical farm.
Why are we so suited and booted for this task?
The idea is to better predict eruptions.
So we fire it up. Once we close the doors behind us, no one can hear you scream. I better not touch it anymore. This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Tech Now on BBC News.
Hello again, thank you for being with us, and welcome back to The Context USA with me, Ben Brown, here in London.
And me, Sumi Somaskanda, in Washington. Illinois awaits a ruling from a federal judge on whether to extend an order blocking the deployment of the National Guard in Chicago, which runs out tomorrow.
We'll have more on that story in just a minute. I just want to bring you some breaking news, though, from the United States, because Donald Trump has said that a story in the Wall Street Journal, which said that the Trump administration was going to approve the use by Ukraine of long-range missiles to be fired deep into Russia. Donald Trump says that is fake news, exclamation mark. The United States, he says, has nothing to do with those missiles, wherever they may come from, or what Ukraine does with them. The Wall Street Journal had put out a story a little bit earlier on saying that the Trump administration had lifted a key restriction on Ukraine's use of some long-range missiles. Of course, President Zelensky has been pleading with Washington to supply it with Tomahawk long-range missiles that could strike deep into Russia, which could change the course of the war, he would hope. But Donald Trump pouring a lot of cold water on all of that and saying it's fake news.
Yeah, a point of much contention, Ben. Let's bring our panel back in, Joy Cheney and Jennifer Carroll. Joy, we promised before the break we would let you finish your thoughts, so I want to give you the opportunity to do so now.
Well, this is just a reflection on the overall foreign policy of Donald Trump. It is important that he is always seeking to make a deal. But what we have seen over the course of his life, if you study him, is that sometimes those deals do not last. And I think that always when you're seeking peace, you must, I'm a civil rights person. Without justice, there is no peace. So whether you're in the Ukraine or whether you're in the Gaza Strip, without justice that both sides can perceive and feel as justice, there will never be lasting peace. Ukraine needs a deal that protects them not just now, but that protects them from a Russian aggression in the future.
OK, well, thank you both once again for the moment. And we have talked quite a lot about foreign policy on the programme so far. Before we move on to other stories, let's just bring you right up to speed on a developing story in the last few hours, because the United States has carried out another attack on a vessel in international waters, killing 2 people. This is according to the US War Secretary, as he's now called, Pete Hegseth, who alleges that that vessel was a, quote, narco-trafficking boat. But no details have been provided on who was on board that boat or what was on board that boat.
Let's bring in our South America correspondent, Ione Wells. She's following this story for us. Ione, good to see you. What do we know?
Well, this is now the 8th strike of this kind that the US has carried out on these vessels, which it alleges are narco-trafficking vessels carrying drugs towards the US. It claims the people on board are narco-terrorists, but it hasn't yet provided any evidence so far after any of these strikes about who exactly was on board, what their cargo is, the identity of any of these people or any affiliated organizations to them. In this latest strike, the US has said it killed 2 people, meaning that now at least 34 people have been killed in total in these strikes. Now, what is quite interesting about this latest one is the previous 7 have all been carried out in the Caribbean, mostly off the coast of Venezuela. This strike was carried out on the Pacific Ocean side of South America. That is interesting because many analysts had questioned really how the US's logic really kind of matched what it was actually doing in practice. The US has framed these strikes as part of a war on drug trafficking, and yet the Caribbean isn't really a drug trafficking hotspot when you compare it to other regions. The Pacific Ocean, however, is a much more major drug trafficking route. So in that sense, it matches more the rhetoric of what the US has been saying every time one of these strikes has been carried out. That being said, there is still growing evidence, many believe, that these strikes are not just about tackling drug trafficking, but also about putting military pressure on, in particular, the government of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, who the US doesn't recognize as a legitimate president and has long characterized as the leader of a drug trafficking organization, something which he denies, but which I think gives the US kind of an excuse, a definition, to also target him and his inner circle as part of this wider military buildup.
And Ione, this also has led to a real conflict, a growing conflict between the U.S. and Colombia, hasn't it?
That's right. President Donald Trump has also accused the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, of being involved in drug trafficking, something which he denies. And for his part, Gustavo Petro has also accused Donald Trump and the U.S. administration of murdering a Colombian citizen and carrying out one of these strikes in Colombian waters, something which, again, the U.S. has pushed back on and said there isn't evidence for. Now, we do know that there have been at least 2 survivors of these strikes, one of whom was a Colombian national who we understand is in a very bad condition in hospital, but will later be processed by Colombian authorities. Another is an Ecuadorian national who's been returned to Ecuador and who Ecuador's prosecutor's office has said has been released and that there wasn't any evidence to charge him. So there has been, though, as you say, escalating tensions as a result between the Colombian government and the US government. I think this latest strike, given its location, given it is on the Pacific side, essentially off the coast of Colombia, I think it's pretty fair to say that this will trigger even more tension between the Colombian government and the US administration.
OK, Ione Wells, thank you for that reporting.
Let's go back to our panel to talk about this in the context of US foreign policy under Donald Trump. Jennifer Carroll and Joy Cheney. Jennifer, I mean, Donald Trump wants to be thought of as a man of peace. He wants to, we all know he wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And, you know, we talked about what he's done in the Middle East, what he's trying to do in Ukraine. With these attacks on these so-called narco boats, which are of questionable international legality, shall we say, does he look like a man of peace, or does he look rather trigger happy?
I tell you, one of the things that we have done for years in this country is have a war on drugs. And more we've not addressed it directly, drugs have come into our shores, impacting a lot of our particularly minority areas. So Donald Trump, I believe in his effort here, is taking the fight away from our shorelines so the drugs aren't coming into our borders. I think the narcos are probably seeing, okay, if I'm coming straight from Venezuela into, or coming from Cuba area into the South of America, then I'm going to go somewhere else where a greater opportunity for me to infiltrate and bring my drugs into those areas. And I believe that's probably why on the Pacific side of Colombia, we're seeing now a different trajectory for those boats and those semi-submersible submarines coming in with their drugs.
Can I just ask you one question though on that? I mean, there is no process here, is there? How do we know, and it's possible, isn't it, that there could be a case of mistaken identity? There could be an attack on for example, an innocent fishing vessel, killing people on board.
Well, the fishing vessels shouldn't be that far up. However, I am quite sure they probably have intel, but they cannot say that because then they'll be killed, but have intel on land to let them know when these boats are coming out, because how would they know? Either they have satellites on them, they have intelligence that's giving them direct communication as to where the coordinates of these boats are going and knowing where to strike. But if they say we have intel within these organizations, they're going to be peeling off people left and right, and that intel person may be the one to get murdered, and then therefore no information will be disseminated as to where these boats are going.
Okay, Jennifer, Joy, we're going to stick with you both, come back to you in a moment, but we are up against a break again. Let's take a short pause around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
Well, welcome back to The Context USA with me, Ben Brown, here in London. Now, as you might know, the government in the United States is still shut down. Yes, Democrats and Republicans continue to blame each other. And no, there is little sign that either side is going to budge.
But that doesn't mean that it's all quiet up on Capitol Hill. In the case of the Senate overnight, much the opposite. One Democrat has been using the opportunity to call attention to what he says are Donald Trump's grave threats to democracy.
Let's just show you the scene live now in the US Senate, where Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley has been speaking on the Senate floor now for more than 20 hours, accusing President Trump of tyranny and weaponization of the justice system. In the last 20 minutes or so, the senator has said he plans to speak for another hour, just for good measure. Let's see if we can just dip in very briefly and give you a sense of what he's saying.
Right now, work together, bringing their diverse life experiences, their knowledge of their individual states, and together find a strategy that will address their collective challenges, so that each and every part of the country.
So that effort from Senator Merkley in Oregon isn't actually the longest speech on the Senate floor. You might remember that Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey set the record earlier this year when he spoke for 5 hours and 5 minutes, also to protest President Trump.
Yeah, I wonder, it's a contest really, isn't it, for the Guinness Book of Records, longest speech. But anyway, they are mega marathon speeches, and they are symbolic. Other than disrupting Senate business, they don't wield more power for Democrats, but Democrats are hoping they provide a platform at least. In his speech, Senator Merkley lashed out at Donald Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Portland in Senator Merkley's home state of Oregon. He accused Donald Trump of using National Guard troops to tighten his authoritarian grip.
Yeah, there was a big victory for the Trump administration on Monday. An appeals court ruled that the president can deploy National Guard troops to Portland despite objections from local leaders there. It is unclear when those troops might deploy amid further legal battles, but it is part of the president's crackdown on what he calls rampant crime and riots in Democrat-led cities like Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles.
And we are now awaiting a ruling from a federal judge in Illinois on whether or not to extend an order blocking the deployment of the National Guard in Chicago. A temporary restraining order which bars troops from patrolling Chicago runs out tomorrow, and the judge says it can only be extended once.
So a lot of news there, obviously, on National Guard deployments. And I just want to mention that we're also seeing our partners at CBS News here in the U.S. have said that two sources familiar with plans say that U.S. Border Patrol agents, ICE agents, are expected to arrive in San Francisco as early as Thursday. Not National Guard troops, but ICE agents. And the San Francisco Chronicle was the first to report on federal agents dispatched to the Bay Area. So that coming in from our partners at CBS News. But Jennifer and Joy, I want to get your take on this as well. Joy, let's start with you, because this continues to be a widening crackdown.
Yeah, interestingly, he's not going to Memphis, Tennessee, which has some of the highest crime in the country, but is in a Republican-red state, or other Republican red states where they have cities with high crimes. He's choosing Democratic cities. This is an improper use of the authority around the National Guard. And ultimately, you know, the American people are speaking out. I'm sure you all have reported on the No King rally that happened over the weekend. It's happened before, and vast numbers of people coming out, taking to the street to do as Senator Merkley is doing, to speak out against a growing authoritarianism in the United States. It's even connected to your previous story, where everyone's for cracking down on drugs, but to do so unilaterally without involving Congress and without having oversight, even of the press, because we see what's happening at the so-called Department of War, is in itself a threat to democracy. So that is what's happening here. And so, sure, we're going to see what happens in the courts. At the end of the day, the courts are using a similar standard. Where ICE facilities are being blocked from running, then that's where the president has his greatest amount of authority and power. But where it's not, then, you know, we'll see him blocked. That's what's happening there. The standard isn't different. Our question is, will Donald Trump now say, oh, we can't operate these facilities because of protesters? And that would be a violation of the First Amendment. So we'll see what happens.
So I do want to say, Joy, that Memphis was included in this crackdown. It is a Democrat-led city, but a Republican state. And the difference there that's important, of course, is that the governor of Tennessee did welcome the National Guard deployment. So it's a different dynamic. But to that point,
it's a completely different dynamic. But my point, I think, is well taken, is that he did not treat Memphis in the same way he is treating San Francisco and other places. Those are places where their states have said, we have seen a diminishment of crime here, and we do not want you here because we have it under control here. And he has overcome that, and it's clearly for political reasons.
Okay, Jennifer, you know, you served as lieutenant governor. What would Florida have said if, let's say, President Biden wanted to send in National Guard troops against the wishes of officials there?
Well, it has to be a reason, and the reason has to be specific. And the president has the authority to federalize the National Guard. But usually it's done in a communication as to what the specific issues are. For example, whether it's a hurricane or allowing in Alabama in the 60s, the National Guard was federalized to allow Blacks to go to an institution, an educational institution. So it depends on the specifics of it. But a couple things on your story here. Of speaking on the floor in the Senate and pontificating, it's not moving the needle to get people back to work. It's not moving the needle to get the government open. It is not Donald Trump's responsibility to pass the budget or to pass the continuing resolution. It is the Senate's job right now to vote on it. They've had 11 or 12 or 13 votes where the Democrats did not come to, at least additional 5 Democrats, come to the table to vote to keep the government open. It's the health care, and there's the Obamacare, and there's the something else and something else, while people are hurting. Their jobs are to go to the Congress and represent the people and speak on behalf of the people and do the policies for good governance of the people. Speaking on the floor and having a long conversation with themselves, because if you pan back, I'm quite sure no one is sitting in those chairs listening to anyone speaking on the Senate floor. The other thing, too, is that with the National Guard, President Trump stated that he wants to make sure that these ICE agents are able to do their job. If these rioters aren't in the face of ICE agent and throwing Molotov cocktails and ramming their cars and giving them threatening gestures, then they can do their job peacefully. If they want to protest, nothing wrong with that. Just be not in their face and be so violent with the things that they're doing. These people have a job to do. And any country wants something peaceful to make sure they go after the criminals and those that are here illegally, or those that have committed some sort of crime, to make sure that they're not a threat to the communities.
Joy,
The threat to the community happening right now is from the ICE agents. But can I just say, one thing, the people on the ground have been overwhelmingly peaceful. They have, there were very few, if any, arrests in most of the protests this weekend. That's actually a good thing. It speaks well of our democracy. Sorry.
Well, we have a constitutional republic in the United States.
Go on, Jennifer, go on.
We have a constitutional republic in the United States, and we often go to democracy, democracy. And we have a constitution that people ought to abide by from top and down the chain as well.
Except Donald Trump. He doesn't seem to always abide by the Constitution. And can I just say on the government shutdown, Democrats are willing to come to the table. Elections do matter, which means we have a Republican majority and a Democratic minority, but they cannot pass any kind of bill without having at least 60 votes in the Senate. And they don't have it. And so what you have to do is come to the other side. You don't just put something before them and say everyone has to do what I say. And if not, the tough luck. No, they have to come to the table. Let me tell you what matters to the American people. By November 1st, everyone is going to have window shopping open, and they're going to find out that their premiums are going up, not by a little percent. In Georgia, $700 for a family of four, going up to nearly more than $2,000. No one can afford that. None of us on this call would be able to afford that kind of jump, especially not the working class people that are going to be hit by this type of spike. So let me tell you what, the Republicans are going to come to the table. They know that because even every state that has already had this window shopping open, in every state, Republicans there are saying, hey, we got to make a deal. The first and foremost, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Same thing with Florida. Take a look at your premiums. The American people are behind Democrats in their effort to say, if Republicans want to open up the government, we got to bring health care into it. Sorry.
I've got to jump in because it's all the time we have for in that story. Stay with us, Jennifer Joy. You're watching The Context USA on BBC News.